Welcome to Malvern Books. Thank you all for coming out on this great night. This is a wonderful celebration we've been looking forward to for such a long time with Elena and Tomás, and it's just an awesome night. You know, the books are great. They're new. They're just vibrant and fun. So we're so lucky to be able to hear them read. So we'll just get to it. We'll start with Elena Passarello, is the author of two collections of essays, Let Me Clear My Throat and Animals Strike Curious Poses. Her essays on performance, pop culture, and the natural world have recently appeared in Oxford American, Virginia Quarterly Review, Paris Review Daily, and elsewhere. She is the recipient of the 2015 Whiting Award in Nonfiction, and she teaches at Oregon State University. Elena?
Wow, thank you so much for coming, and what a real pleasure to be reading at Malvern Books. I lived in Austin for just a little bit. My partner lived here for longer, and when we discovered Malvern, we felt like we had, well, I was mad because I had already moved. And I was like, I came back to visit him, and I was like, what? And we just really felt like we had come home. It's just such a gorgeous, thoughtful, well-curated store, welcoming, and as my friend Ellie just said, maybe one of the best poetry collections, definitely in the state, maybe in the whole region. So as a non-poet, I feel like, I feel happy to be here, but also, you know, like a little prosaic, so to speak. It's also a thrill to be reading with my dear friend and the birthday boy, Tomás Morín. This is very much the release of his second collection. I think that's what we're all really here to celebrate, so I'm very happy to be his opening act, the Rolling Stones to his James Brown. So I have just one piece. You know what I'm talking about. Tomás is great because I didn't want to do anything eulogy-esque, you know, but like he's not dead or anything. But you guys are just standing here looking at me, and so I want to say something awesome about Tomás because I love him so much, and basically all I ever do is tell David how much I love you. So now that I have a congregation, I'm going to preach to the choir. The thing that I love about Tomás as a person is that he is so warm and thoughtful and gentle, and he always leaves so much space in the room for all of the other people and what they're doing and making. And the thing that I love about Tomás's poetry is it's not that it's the opposite, but it just welcomes in this other kind of muscular confidence into that persona. I love that Tomás's poems know what they are, what they want to do. They're so beautifully constructed and gorgeous, but they also have this power about them. So it's wonderful to meet such a generous, kind of welcoming man who writes poetry that just feels like it's the best elephant that could ever be in the room, right? And speaking of elephants in the room, here's my book on animals. Haha, segue. So my collection of essays is called Animals Strike Curious Poses. And it's a kind of a contemporary bestiary or bestiary of animal celebrity. So if you've ever read or heard about these medieval bestiaries, they're these kind of stories from the Middle Ages, these kind of encyclopedias of what animals do. And there's as much fact in these books about animals as there is imagination. So in like a medieval bestiary from Scotland in the 13th century, in the article about the beaver, they said something like, a beaver has a flat tail and buck teeth, and if you come upon it in its habitat and try to hunt it, it will bite its own testicles off. So, so there's like, there's some truth there, but there's also this kind of, there's myth that's attached, right? And I think that's one of my favorite things about nonfiction, the genre in which I write, is I think we report imagination as much as we report truth. And I think there's something about what happens when we as humans make an animal famous. That we take the biology of the animal and then our own imaginations, and we sort of fuse it together into this thing that isn't quite reportage, but isn't quite myth either. So every essay in the collection covers an animal, and the rule of the book is the animal had to have been given a name. So we had to have in some way inscribed a name for this animal, a human-generated name. It could be a number, a scientific name. I cheated with the first essay and said that a cave painting counted as a kind of naming. And it's chronologically organized from this woolly mammoth named Yucca, who recently fell out of the Siberian permafrost thanks to global warming. And it moves through the Gilded Age and Shakespearean England and medieval Europe. The space race, the first North American female in space was a spider named Arabella, who spun a web on Skylab in 1973. And it goes all the way to 2015 to the process of de-extinction, which is this thing where we're taking these animals that don't exist anymore and trying to use cellular technology to bring them back. And we've been mildly successful. I thought I would read a short essay from the Elizabethan era. This piece is called Sacrosanct. It's actually the first piece that I wrote for the book. And the thing that made me start writing it was when I learned that. So you've got your Globe Theatre, on the banks of the Thames. And then there's this other building right next to the Globe that's shaped octagonally just like the Globe, and it's a bear baiting ring. It's this sort of theater where all of these different animals were fighting each other, not for money, but they weren't getting any of the money, right? And Shakespeare at the time had he was a competitive guy, and he had a lot of rivals. There were a lot of people that were sort of taking ticket sales away from him that pissed him off a little bit. And so he would kind of have these shady mentions of them in his plays, but rarely did he ever say them by name. So there's this kind of reference to the children's company that's taking some of his tickets away in Hamlet. And there's this really sweet kind of eulogy for Christopher Marlowe and As You Like It, but neither of those actually name the people. The only one of Shakespeare's rivals that he actually names in one of his plays is this bear named Sacrosanct, who must have really got his goat. He was such a famous bear. There's a whole bunch of literature, or not literature, but a whole bunch of found information about him. And I just love the idea that, down at UT, in the bookstore, there's 1,000, intro to Shakespeare books that have the name of this bear in it just because of a whim of this great man. So here's Sacrosanct, okay? The London garden, brackish and packed in, was hazy with a dozen kinds of flesh. The bulls, cocks, mastiffs, men and chimpanzees in air so rickety it lowered the roof. So dark, the line between crowd and beasts was marred. There, in that black, Sir Raleigh took his Frenchmen, and other men of duty took their spies. The reason for their famous fireworks, just so the folks who wagered bets could see. A rose of flames, pitched high above the crowd, fired smoke into the muck that hung about. It spun. It spat red bits around the seats. They rigged it to toss pears as it rotated. The fruit-mad crowd would then jump up and chase the rolling pears out to the bankside streets. Or yard boys, eager in their dirty gloves, would toss hot bread upon the patrons' laps, which made them clutch and scurry toward the exit. Outside, they'd find some other Sunday sport, an archery butt, a woman, or a play. The stews downriver had less fornication, and St. Bartholomew's floors less wet with blood. The bloody muzzle, the mastiff's blood, the blood of fisticuffs up in the stands, the blood of offal floated down the Thames to Bankside from the abattoirs of town. And by the time the century turned around, it seemed the blood most often spilled was his. But do not think that London's garden crowd imagined him some broken, bashed-in thing. Believe me, this is tricky. I might see the lives of baited bears as nothing but a broken cord of muzzle, chain, and stake, of blunted teeth, barrages of dog jaws, of living out a mongrel just to have another thrown upon the slavered flesh. That rank's the only place that he could run, a hard-won constitutional, fighting dogs and running laps in that dank polygon, that garden, broken even in its flowers. The rosettes they affixed to his brow were bullseyes for the mastiffs when they jumped. And jump they did, mouths tearing up the flesh that leered at them from each side of the bloom. They bit so hard that London's citizens grew up thinking a bear's eyes to be pink. A few years of that, he was too blind to fight. The bearwards had to get creative then. Chained center, hunkered, lashed by volunteers until the blood ran rivers down his spine. Sometimes he'd raise his matted arms and gnash about the lash until it broke in half. And once, he stooped low to the lazy knot, untied himself with effort from the stake, then nosed about the rink in backward loops to hear the ladies scream, the bearwards scramble. They dragged him off stage to his pit, in cheers. For even then, near lame, sightless, he could still throw 9 stone mastiffs to the crowds, up to the boxes, to the ladies' laps, bypassing pumpkin hose, straight to the skirts, like he could sniff a woman's quivering thigh and hurl the big dog head or tail right to her. A snort, a twitch to shudder the dog's spit, a fling, a lady's lap, a going, "Ah!" And then they'd add another dog, then 2, till 6 or 7 mastiffs lined the rink, the sound more deafening since his sight was gone. God damn it if he wasn't still around. They could have put his picture on the money. Elizabeth, who never said hello, loved him enough to ban all Thursday's sport. Upon the mildest Thursdays, he'd parade out past the playhouse, down to London Bridge. He'd smell the ragmen, actors, punks in stews who yelled for him in right cacophony. The bulls, in ribbon horns, all marched behind. The cocks in boxes and the dogs behind. The only bear that ever led the dogs. And even on his nights off, he appeared in name checks at the Hope, the Rose, the Globe, a dactyl in the mouths of water poets. The only rival Shakespeare called by name. In Johnson, in Act 5 at Dunsinane, at Middle Temple Hall on Candlemas, when Chambers' fairest boy and fake Dugs crooned, "Have you not set mine honor at the stake and baited it with all the unmuzzled thoughts that tyrannous heart can think?" So, it'd be wrong to match that bear with breaking. They built him up. They called him out by name because they read in him a secret code, both terrifying and recognizable. They saw it in his stance, up on 2 legs, the 4 paws spread, the 10 claws digital. They saw it in his low slung hips and gut, the way his pupils, round and beady, lived inside a circle of expressive white. And milliseconds prior to the bite, they saw it as he bowed his head and sighed. What did they see? They saw themselves, of course. A taller man, more leaden in hirsute, with thick skin better suited for a beating, but still, their bear, this massive chestnut frame, dwarfed tiny by a darkened ring of foes. A smaller ratio of the rink itself dwarfed by the river, flowing to its north, that lurid, pestilent Thames. 6 city plagues, the pox, the new ague, the curious sweats, all floated past that bear garden in leagues, a river of unprecedented sick. In 92, things got so royally poxed, the playhouses were forced to shudder up. A quarter of their population down each decade, give or take 100 score. And a blighted age can make a garden blind. Each ticket holder turns left, right, behind, and wonders which part of their dark quartet will suffer an unnatural upset next. For when our clans explode up into towns, the backbite comes from nature, and it smarts. The devil holds back nature by its ears, takes aim, makes wager, then releases it. And we toss it off, but it regenerates. 6 natural mouths leap forth before we're primed. And parades of sickness cannot be explained by any learned clansmen, physics, priests. This inexplicable can send us toward an unplanned occupation with the self. And selves, like famous bears, are singular. We are soon switches places with I am, and then clans bewitched by I ams become crowds, which are an altogether different thing. And he heard those I ams in the garden's roar. I am this bear, stuck in this blighted rink, beset upon by nature's ticking clock. I am not hunkered down in numbered packs. Instead, I am awaiting death alone. I am afraid of time's encroaching power. For each new year, I am more bluntly struck. I feel pain, feel it doubling, then I am it. I am always in wait of time's new teeth. And though befuddled, drunk on sick, I am unfit to tear my eyes away from him. The growl of him, his mighty swipe, his blood, the way he foams both in and out of hours. My chain of foes would weigh less, I am sure, if I could toss off minutes, break pain's spine, or send plague squealing to a bitch's lap. For even if I knew more time, more sick was at the go, it'd be a righteous salve to fight whatever hour's on me now, to discard the sick dog of what is now, to throw it, a contaminated rag stained with the gusto of my intellect. Yes, I am jealous of his natural acts, and so I'll hit his nature with a stick. And that's sacrosanct. Thank you so much for listening.